So the Heat trying to get a second win here on this home. So trying to finish up this homestand at 500, which is obviously super disappointing coming off a 4-0 road trip. This was really an opportunity to take advantage and maybe go a few games over 500 before heading out on the road. All right, every guest on ZASLOW Show 2.0 is brought to us by Johnny Cuba, European roots of the Caribbean soul. Start your day with a refreshing German lager in a can. You can purchase locally at Sedano's, Presidente, Winn-Dixie, Fresco y Mas, and you got holiday specials right now on 6-packs of Johnny Cuba. Remember, always drink responsibly, and don't forget about Johnny Cuba's mantra, stay tranquilo. So very good timing here as we bring aboard George Sedano, Pacific guy out there on the West Coast. George, happy holidays, happy New Year. I saw you were with the crew there in Denver. Jokic with the triple double. Is this your first time working ESPN TV for the Christmas games?
No, I've done like 4 or 5 of them
Oh
over the years.
wow, that many
Yeah,
years?
yeah. I was in Milwaukee last year for Boston, Milwaukee. I was in Denver a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, for Zion's first Christmas game. I've done a number of them over the years.
Do you think the NBA was pissed off with the NFL?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure if you put them on Truth Serum, yeah, they were annoyed. The NFL could have totally played all those games on Saturday, and
Totally.
yeah, and but by the way, the NFL really had some stinkers. Those games looked much better on
Oh yeah.
paper, and then they were not games that were that attractive. I think the Packers Dolphins was probably the most attractive of all those games once we came down to the wire and actually came to Christmas Day, because the latter two were not interesting at all. And by the way, the Rams game obviously being a blowout made it even worse, right? So, I mean, who knew that Baker Mayfield would have some sort of resurgence in LA? But
I
yeah,
haven't I haven't seen the numbers, but wouldn't we guess though that
oh no,
those shit
yeah,
NFL games outdrew the NBA,
oh, no,
right?
no question, no question. I haven't
Yeah.
seen the numbers either, because again, the NFL is always going to outdraw the NBA because of scarcity, right? 17 versus 82, like there's just a different kind of urgency. And of course, we also love that it's the gladiator sport of modern times, right? Like I think all that, and gambling, right? Gambling, fantasy,
Oh,
whatever you want to
gambling's the
throw in there.
best. Gambling is
Right.
so good.
It's
So good.
just it's because of the scarcity. There's more of an influence when it comes to gambling, I think, in fantasy. So.
All right, so I want to get to NBA with you, and we'll do some Heat stuff also. But while we're talking NFL there, real quick, you got a strong opinion or two based on what's going on with Tua? You know, I talked a lot about it on my show, where it feels like we're back at square one, where for
Yeah,
a few weeks,
yeah,
yo, we got the right guy. Tua's better than Herbert, and then on the
no,
day that Tua gets put back in concussion protocol, the same day Herbert goes and clinches a playoff spot on Monday Night Football.
yeah. I was never in the camp that he's a better individual player than Herbert, but I did think that, and I do think that he fits what they're trying to do. I do think now it's on Mike McDaniel to just figure out, okay, here are the deficiencies, here are what teams are taking away, clearly the middle of the field. How do we make this work? And that to me is going to be on him, less on, I mean, somewhat on Tua too, don't get me wrong, but I think that the coach needs to put him in positions to succeed. I think when you look at Tua, I think you look at a guy who's clearly very accurate, a guy who can put the ball in the right places to make his playmakers make plays. It's what he did at Alabama for the most part too. Now, at this level, I think that defenses are far more sophisticated, obviously, and that's why I think coaching is going to matter when it comes to this stuff. But look, I was at that Chargers game live. I went to the game, and you could just see the clear difference between the two guys. I mean, forget about just physically, just I just think the way that they see the game, I think, seems fairly obvious. But I still think the Dolphins can be a playoff team. And by the way, if the Dolphins make the playoffs, that's a good season. I don't care what anybody tells me. This defense is not playing all that great. Their secondary has been in shambles pretty much all season for the most part. No Byron Jones at all, which was something that they expected, at least going into the season. I think people presumed that he would be healthy and available. But look, do I think Tua is a guy that's going to elevate talent like a Patrick Mahomes, even though he has a better passer rating than he does? No, he's not that guy. He's a guy that keeps the trains running on time and is a guy that needs playmakers around him. And he needs all the elements to be at least average to above average around him for them to have real success. And they haven't gotten that. The defense has not been good, so they've been below average. And the receivers have been a little dinged up over the last couple of weeks, although they're still performing at a really high level. And teams are taking stuff away from him. So he's not an elite quarterback, but he's good enough to be a playoff quarterback.
People seem to think that they've nailed down the play where he may have gotten concussed. We're never going to know if he actually got a concussion. We're never going to know how many he's had so far this year. It's so tricky. But people seem to have nailed down when it looks like it may have happened, if it did happen. And then for a quarterback who's very careful with the ball and doesn't turn it over, he had 5 interceptions all year. Then he has 3 interceptions in the fourth quarter. So it's circumstantial evidence, but like, do we nail it down and say, yeah, like that must have been because of a concussion because he doesn't throw interceptions?
I mean, it's possible, right? I think that, there's potentially some correlation there. But I also think that, again, teams have just played him differently. And it felt like the Packers, when you looked at the second half, particularly, even before that potential hit, right? Or that his head slamming against the ground, he was not performing as well earlier on in that second half either, at least to my knowledge. So look, I just think it could be a combination of all those things. I don't think it has to be a binary situation when it comes to him in that specific game. But, look, man, I just think that Dolphins fans got a taste of like, oh man, we're legitimately good. And then all of a sudden December happens and teams play differently in December. And it's as cliche as it sounds, most of these teams, I know there's 17 games now, take these games in quarters. And that last quarter is always the most difficult. And the teams that succeed in the last quarter are teams that can do a number of things well. Some sort of combination of this, if not all of them, right? Incredible quarterback play, running the ball, and being able to defend, right? Now, in a perfect world, you get all 3 of those. But if you're not getting at least 1 or 2 of those, you're in trouble. And I think what we've seen from the Dolphins is they've had decent running game, but the coach, for one reason or another, has chosen to run away from it, right? I think that in that Chargers game was a good example where maybe they weren't busting it open every time, but if you go back, I'm pretty sure they ran it at nearly 5 yards a clip, right? But they didn't run it enough in that game. And then, of course, the following game against Buffalo, that was another conversation about not running it enough. So I do think that the coach and the coaching staff could do a better job of maybe masking some of their potential deficiencies by playing it a little safer. I know that's not what they want to do, but I think that you have to manage the game differently at different times of the season.
So George is obviously out there on the West Coast. He's a Pacific guy. The Heat have the Lakers. We don't know LeBron's status at this point as far as whether.
Okay, so I have an update. Right?
Oh, okay.
I have an update. I can't tell you who.
Come on.
But I asked this person, do you think LeBron plays tonight or against Miami? Because he hasn't played both ends of the back-to-back yet. And I was told he's listed as probable tonight. Doesn't seem like he'd want to miss Miami. So perhaps he
really? I mean, he misses Miami so much.
Well, not with the Lakers, though. He did with Cleveland.
That's true.
Not with the Lakers. He has played every game in Miami with the Lakers. So I said perhaps both. You don't know. And they might need him to play both in this scenario because of all the injuries that they're dealing with.
Okay, so we'll get to actual basketball stuff in a second, but what is the NBA going to do about this scenario? Okay, the load management, the players not playing back-to-back games. I mean, George, here in Miami, and I'm sure they do in a lot of NBA franchises, they have tier pricing. They have tier pricing for the Laker game because of LeBron, all right? Not because Kendrick Nunn's returning, all right? So if LeBron doesn't play and Anthony Davis is already out, why am I paying more money? So, like, something has to give, right? Or is anything going to be done about this?
I think the collective bargaining agreement, the one that's eventually coming up, there will be a reckoning. I don't think there's any question. I think that you're going to see, particularly like when it comes to players and their contracts and sitting out, I think all that stuff is going to be on the table. We saw the situation with Ben Simmons, obviously in Philadelphia, and then even potentially with the Nets at the beginning. Now that one, I I know was more injury related. His back was way worse than people were letting on. He did try to keep ramping up with the Nets and then just suffered a bunch of setbacks. But the Philly situation is obviously the situation that most people will refer to. And I think that is going to be a big deal, right? I think that's basically, for lack of a better phrase, there's going to be a Ben Simmons rule, I think, or at least the owners will try to implement something like that. Now, when it comes to the missing of games for rest or not rest, whatever you want to call it, I think that's going to be a huge issue, but I just don't know how you police that, to be honest with you.
I don't either.
The stuff with the contracts and guys sitting out because they don't want to play for a certain team or asking out, et cetera, that stuff, honestly, as crazy as it sounds, is actually a little easier to manage potentially in a collective bargaining agreement than it would be this situation where guys are sitting out for rest because they have minor injuries. But to me, this is the way I look at it, and I don't think enough people are talking about it this way. I think that, for example, I think that guys in the past had shorter careers for the most part because they didn't get the rest. So in this situation, let's use Chris Paul because I just had Phoenix as an example, right? Chris Paul has had a number of injuries over his career and significant injuries, not like small, like muscle related injuries, right? And he's now in year 17 or whatever it is. Because they've been able to manage him, he's still able to play at a pretty decent level, right, at this stage of his career. Whereas maybe in the 90s, early 2000s, Chris Paul would have been done after 7 or 8 years or 9 years, maybe 10 max. So I think that there is a give and take with this that is not being discussed. So to your point, it stinks for the fans. And I don't know if there's an easy solution for that. But I do think if you look at it from that perspective, which not enough people are, guys are extending their careers further because of this rest situation that we have.
I have two more questions on this topic then for you, George. The first one is, why do superstar players, why are they the only ones that need load management?
That's a great question. I think those are the guys that get the most pub. I think that that's twofold, right? I do think there are guys who are role players who don't play. And I do think that it just doesn't get enough publicity. But what I would say to you is that the guys who are not the superstars are the guys who are fighting for contracts and money and things of that nature and stability for whatever it's worth in their rotation or perhaps for their future beyond this particular season. So I think that's part of it, right? I think that to me is probably the bigger reason why the role players don't get the load management that the star players get.
And my second question in regards to this topic is, why don't hockey players ever need load management?
It's a great question. I also think that those guys, while they take a brutal beating to their bodies, I think that it's just embedded in the culture now, right? And I think that it's where in the NBA, there's been a more scientific approach to the body. I feel like in hockey, there isn't that, right? It's just this old school mentality.
If you can breathe, you can play. You got to be there for your team.
Correct. And I think that for the most part, the NBA guys have that during the postseason. But in the regular season, I think that they've taken a different approach. And look, if we're going to blame one team that I think started this,
go on.
I'm not blaming them per se, but this is where I think it really began. With San Antonio.
Just do it. Yeah, just say it. Come on.
Go. I mean, it happened in Miami, right? Remember when the Big Three Heat were playing and Pop sent back to
I don't even think they were on the trip. They weren't even at the game.
Well, they were wherever the previous stop was. It might have been Orlando. They got sent back on Southwest Airlines, if you remember.
Open seating. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's where this started. And again, it was smart. They were ahead of the curve at that time. And now what's happened is, the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? And it's hard to put back in.
LeBron, if they miss the playoffs this year, is this his fourth year or fifth year there?
This is fourth.
Fourth year. If they miss the playoffs this year, let's say, they'll have missed the playoffs twice.
No. This is the fifth.
Fifth year. Okay, so then they'll have missed the playoffs 3 times. The bounce from
this first year they missed.
Yeah.
He got hurt. That was the Christmas game where he messed his groin up.
Last year they missed, and then if they missed this year, that would be 3. They
Right,
got
3 out of
bounced
the
in the
5.
first round once by
And then they
Phoenix,
won the title against
and they
Miami.
won the title. So, like, after if they miss the playoffs this year, like, how are people going to view LeBron's tenure there? Or is it just all about, hey, they could miss the playoffs 1,000 times if they won the championship once? It's a success.
No. I mean, look, if I had to guess, and I don't know this because I haven't spoken to him, I actually haven't had them this year, even though I've been to a couple of their games to watch up close. Yeah, I would guess LeBron's not thrilled. And just based on his post-game commentary a number of times this season, that certainly seems to be the case. I mean, most recently in their last game against on Christmas against the Dallas Mavericks, he talked about the roster and basically says something to the effect of, look, there's only so many times you can dig yourself out of these holes, right? And he has lamented the roster even from game one. He talked about how they don't have lasers, which he was referencing the lack of three-point shooting that they have on the team. The roster construction is not great. The roster construction, honestly, in 3 of the 5 years has not been great. In year 1, they had all those young guys, so there was that. But the guys that Magic and Rob Pelinka put around them, Michael Beasley, Rondo. Now, Rondo did play a key role for them in the title year, the following year, but Beasley, Lance Stevenson, they didn't take the model that Cleveland and Miami had built, or Cleveland the second time and Miami had built, which is put a lot of shooting around him. So they mismanaged that. Year 2, now that was different. Granted, they weren't great in the regular season, statistically shooting, but they had guys who could hit shots, right? Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Kyle Kuzma, even though they didn't hit it at a good clip during the regular season, you saw in the postseason, those guys were good shooters. And in theory, they were good shooters anyway going into the season. They won the championship. The following year, they just had bad luck. I think, Anthony Davis went down at the wrong time. Also, Anthony Davis came in bad shape that year off the bubble and never really got going. They still had a 2-1 lead against Phoenix, and then he got hurt, and they were really done. And LeBron was also playing hurt. He had busted his ankle that year. Solomon Hill rolled him late in the season, or actually, no, I want to say before the All-Star break, rolled his ankle really bad, never really recovered from that. But they still had a lead against the team that went to the finals that year, and just Davis went down and it was over. And then the last 2 seasons, the roster construction has been terrible as well. And now that for sure is on Rob Pelinka because Magic has been gone basically after year 1. And I people will blame LeBron on the Russell Westbrook thing, but to my knowledge, Zaslow, yes, he was in on Russ, but he was in on multiple players that he thought would fit with him and Anthony Davis. Russ was the one that they all came to as a consensus. I know that the Lakers have tried to distance themselves from Russ after that during that first season, but nobody put a gun to Rob Pelinka's head and said, hey, call Tommy Shepard in Washington and make the deal, right? Like, he made the deal because he also thought it would make them a big 3 and make them good. And then this offseason, they had a chance to get off Russ numerous times, and they couldn't, and they didn't do it. I would imagine much to LeBron's chagrin. Now, Darvin Ham, their head coach, deserves a little credit because he's put him in that 6-man role, and he's been better there, although still not great because they're still a net negative when he's on the floor. But better than he was certainly in the starting lineup with LeBron and AD. They at least have guys that can space it a little better than when Russell Westbrook was out there. So it has been a real challenge for this team. And he's going to be 38 in 4 days or 3 days or whatever it's going to be. And he shouldn't be carrying this load at this stage of his career. It's just nuts. Now, AD was playing great. And then unfortunately, the biggest predictor of future injury is past injury. And the guy is just injury prone, unfortunately, at this point, as talented as he is. So now LeBron has to carry this roster that's not very good, that, without AD is just, not playoff worthy.
Let's do a little bit of heat here, George. Say something that's going to make the fan base feel better. Are they going to get it going in the second half here? Eric Spoelstra's teams, every year he's been the coach. They always get better throughout the season. They're always better in the second half of the year than in the first half of the year. They enter this game at 500. It's been a real disappointing homestand, though. They blew it, all right? You got to win those first 2 home games, Chicago and Indiana. And, you could have seen yourself 3 or 4 games over 500 going into this game if that were the case. So it's a major missed opportunity. What do you make of the Heat right now?
They just don't seem to fit, right? It kind of reminds me a lot of the year after the bubble where things just wouldn't go their way.
Well, with Jimmy, it's 1 year on, 1 year off, 1 year on, 1 year off, it seems.
Yeah, but I just don't think you can count on Jimmy for 82 games ever again.
Oh, yeah,
right?
I don't mean Jimmy in particular. I just mean the years that Jimmy's been here. It's up,
gotcha.
down, up, down.
Gotcha. Yeah, right. I agree with that. I also think that the organization, which I love, but if I'm going to be honest, I think they I'm trying to phrase this right. Okay.
Are they drinking a little bit too much of their own Kool-Aid?
Possibly. And I also think that they expect Spo to make miracles, turn wine into water into wine every time. You know what I mean? Like, I think that you can't do that every year. And Caleb is a good player. I don't think Caleb is a starting 4 in this league. I think Caleb is a perfect backup 3. I think that's what he really is. And then they've put a lot into Victor Oladipo and expected him to be Indiana Victor Oladipo, and that just hasn't materialized. And now I get the contract. Hold on one sec, ZASLOW. I have an issue here. I have a crying child that I have to attend to. 1 second.
Okay. All right, back from screaming children. All right, disaster scenario in the Sedano Casa. Everything okay? Everything all right now?
Everything's okay. The 8-year-old wanted to share something with the 4-year-old. The 4-year-old did not want to share. So we were, everybody was crying. So I needed to handle that.
All right. But what it boils down to, though, you think what we've seen so far from the Heat this season, they're a 500 team. You think this is what we're going to get for the whole year, it sounds like.
I don't know about the whole year. They can make a deal. I think if they make a move, then I think that changes things. But I don't know what that move is because here's the thing, right? So if they want, let's say Bojan Bogdanovic, let's just use him as the example. He'd actually fit pretty well, I think, with what they want to do. Why are you shrugging your shoulders? That guy's a good player.
Yeah, like, is he that much different from Duncan Robinson?
Yeah, way better than Duncan Robinson. Are you nuts? Absolutely. It's not even close. They're not even in the same stratosphere. Bojan Bogdanovic, first of all, can put the ball on the floor, can get to the free throw line. The guy averages like 6 free throws a game. And he's a much better defender than Duncan Robinson. So
he's still not a good defender, though. He's still not.
But he's not a negative defender like Duncan Robinson is. He's average at worst, is what I would say. He's a pretty good defender, actually. And he also has been on playoff teams, right? So I know, like, he's been in Utah. They've been in the playoffs. Like, it's not like this would be some sort of surprise to him.
Do you think if they weren't all in holding out on that 1% chance they were going to get Durant, do you think there were like substantial moves they could have made in the offseason?
Perhaps. I don't know that. I know that, look, they were kicking the tires on Jay Crowder, but so are a number of teams. I think Milwaukee's kicking the tires on that. Atlanta's kicking the tires on that.
Like, there's no way you're going to get me to say that the addition of Jay Crowder is...
No.
Yeah.
But here's a guy they could have gotten, speaking of Detroit, Jeremy Grant. Right. Jeremy Grant has been fantastic for Portland this season.
Yeah.
And he'd be perfect because, he's legitimately, what is it? 6'9", 6'10",
he's
right?
Long.
Can play alongside Bam. Like, your defense would be out of control. And he's a good offensive player. He can shoot the ball. He can put it on the floor. Bojan's probably a more accomplished offensive player. But Jeremy Grant is really bleeping good. If not close, he's in the same stratosphere, and much better defensively. So like Jeremy Grant could have been the thing, but the Heat, to your point, it's not just holding out for Durant. It feels like they're always going to hold out and try to hold those assets for the next whale or guy who's disgruntled or whatever. Whereas if you get a guy like Bogdanovic, or you could have gotten a guy like Jeremy Grant, you'd be in really good shape right now, I think.
Yeah, but they don't even really have the assets anymore to trade now, because one of those assets we were talking about was Hero, and right now, obviously, you can't trade him this year anymore. But on top of that, I don't think I want to trade Hero. He's awesome. Like, I don't, if you're getting a guy like Durant, okay, fine, but like, I don't want to trade Tyler Hero.
Okay, so I wouldn't trade Tyler Hero for like Zach Levine or something like.
I wouldn't trade him for Bradley Beal either.
I still probably would trade him for Bradley Beal, because here's the thing. I just think Bradley Beal can be a better defender than Tyler Hero. Tyler Hero is going to get targeted in the playoffs again. Mm-hmm. Tyler Hero was exposed in the postseason last year. He didn't play great with against Atlanta. I think he had 1.5 good games, is what I would call it. He had 2 good games against Philly, and then I know because I covered that series. And basically, Doc Rivers like, we're just not going to let Hero just go off. We're going to make sure somebody sticks with him. And then there was a lack of availability, and he also wasn't all that great when he was out there against Boston. And I know he was injured.
He was hurt, yeah.
Right. But he's not, he can't, you know what he needs to be? And I know he doesn't want to hear this. He's a great sixth man because he's instant offense. He can run the offense too, so he can get other guys involved. And you can put him in a defensive-minded lineup, I think, that allows him to just flourish. And I don't know why he's got this thing that he needs to start. To me, it's not about starting. It's about finishing, perhaps, more so to me. I think.
Well, and I would have thought that he'd have been off that, that he'd have been off that whole idea once he signed the contract. Once he signed the contract, who the hell cares?
Right, I'm with you. And by the way, Manu Ginobili is going into the Hall of Fame as a sixth man, okay? It's what he's best suited as. And that if they just did that, Zaslow, even if they didn't make a move, they'd be a better team. I don't know if they'd be a championship level team, but they'd certainly be better than this 500 team that they've been because the roster and the rotations would be better balanced.
George, you were excellent. I appreciate you stopping by and spending some time with us again. When are you going to be on television again? Let everybody know.
Well, I'm radio first. I'm calling the Alamo Bowl, Washington, Texas, on ESPN Radio on Thursday. Back on TV, I've got Heat Lakers in January 4th in LA, and then I've got Heat Suns on Friday. The Friday after that. So I've got Wednesday, Friday next week, the 4th and the 6th. I've got Heat Lakers, Heat Suns.
Okay. Are the Suns falling apart a little bit?
I mean, if Devin Booker can't play, then they could be in real trouble.
They hate each other? They all hate DeAndre Ayton?
I don't think they hate each other. I just think that this is what happens with teams. After a while, the messages get old. You know how it goes.
I do know how it goes. From all those years in the locker room, I know exactly how it goes.
Yeah.
George, excellent job. Appreciate you hanging out with us, man. Thank you. This is your return/debut, ZASLOW Show 2.0.
Yes, return/debut. I'm excited for you. I'm happy for you. I am. I can't wait to see what ZASLOW 2.0 turns into. I already love what I'm seeing. So best of luck to you and Tam and the fam.
Thanks,
and thanks for having me.
Thanks, George.
You got it.